We want to say a huge good morning to all of the virtual members of Columbine United Church, those of you who join us from literally across the United States, some of you around the world. It is great to have you here, especially those of you in uniform who watch us every single Sunday. We want to say not only a huge welcome, but a huge thank you, and you are always in our thoughts and prayers. Let's give these people a warm Columbine welcome. And there is Half Dome, which means we're working on a reset with the computer, so I'll do a little bit of filling here. It is great to be back. My voice is coming back after having lost it following pneumonia. I have to be very careful not to project. I'm still trying to rebuild my voice, and it's kind of hard because you have your energy and you want your voice to match your energy, but I learned you can't do that. This past week, the dogs took off, and when the dogs take off, what do? You yell at them, and when I yelled at them, I felt, and I was hoarse for 24 hours. So what I'm going to try to do is to speak in just a normal voice. What my ENT says, I guess, talk in a normal voice, which means at the back soundboard, they're doing all the modulation work. If for some reason you cannot hear me, I just want you to raise your hand. Don't worry about it. And we're going to pause, and they're going to work to kind of raise and lower. Somebody at the 8 o'clock service said, well, I was embarrassed to raise my hand, and I didn't get to hear everything you said. It's like, no, that's not the idea. Raise your hand. Don't be embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. So very good. Our scripture reading this morning comes to us from Matthew's Gospel, the 16th chapter, verses 13 through 19. Listen for God's word as it comes to us today. When Jesus arrived in the villages of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, what are people saying about who the Son of Man is? They replied, some think he is John the Baptizer, some say Elijah, some Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Jesus pressed them, and how about you? Who do you say I am? Simon Peter said, you're the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus came back. God bless you, Simon, son of Jonah. You didn't get that answer out of books or from teachers. My Father in heaven, God himself, let you in on this secret of who I really am. And now I'm going to tell you who you are, who you really are. You are Peter, a rock. This is the rock on which I will put together my church, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell will be able to keep it out. And that's not all. You will have complete and free access to God's kingdom, keys to open any and every door. No more barriers between heaven and earth, earth and heaven. A yes on earth is yes in heaven. A no on earth is no in heaven. And here the passage ends, and may God bless these words as we seek to apply them to our lives. Turn it loose. Turn it loose. Now, all of you have a rock in your hand. Hopefully you have a rock in your hand. If you don't have a rock in your hand, then you didn't follow Justin's directions. But I want you to take that rock, I want you to hold it in your hand. Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Upon this rock I will build my church. You know, rocks, they have so much use. I mean, they're the building blocks of the cosmos, building blocks of this planet. And yet, they can do so much damage. They can share so much love. I wonder, what does it mean when Jesus says, upon this rock I will build my church? See, I learned firsthand about the damage and love that a rock can do when I was 9 years old. When I was 9 years old, my little brother did something, and I got busted for it. But I wasn't going to rat him out. And so I was punished. I was grounded for a week. A week. That meant no TV. That meant I couldn't go swimming in our swimming pool. That meant I was going to miss the big basketball tournament. And I was mad. And so when you're 9 years old, you've got to kind of share it with the world that you're mad. And so I went outside to our side yard. And I've got to set this up just a little bit. We lived in San Diego, and those of you who are familiar with San Diego, you know of Mount Helix, and we lived halfway up Mount Helix, and so we had this commanding view down on the El Cajon Valley, and our house was designed kind of a split level where we had huge plate glass windows around our living room with a deck that off the plate glass windows. So you had this beautiful view that you could enjoy, and these windows were huge. And my mom, and they were a challenge because my mom was always Windexing and cleaning the windows. And my father was always outside hosing them off and had a big squeegee, because they're up on a second story cleaning those, because those windows shined. And, when you have 6 kids, there's always, handprints about this high up, as a kid. And so she was constantly cleaning. And so I went outside. I was mad. And we have a swimming pool. I grew up with a swimming pool. And I looked down, I saw a rock. And I said, I'm going to go to that swimming pool, and I'm going to break a rule. And I'm going to skip this rock across that pool. And it might hit the diving board, it might hit the tile or something on the other side and chip it, and that'll be good. Or if it falls in the bottom, that'll be good, because then my dad will have to sweep it up. And I said, that's a great idea. Until I looked over and I saw those plate glass windows. And all of a sudden, I had a better idea. I didn't even really think about it. But I took that rock as a 9-year-old and I let that baby go. And I mean to tell you, my arc was right on. And it was going to hit dead center of that big plate glass window. And I thought, this is going to be cool. Until, in that moment, when everything happens in slow motion, and the world slows way down, I had the ability to look beyond the rock, through the window. And I saw a human being standing there. And the human being was a woman. And the woman was my mother. And she had seen the whole thing transpire. And as the rock went sailing towards the window, her hands went to her face. Now it's amazing how much damage a rock can do. It's where I learned the power of a rock. Jesus said, upon this rock, I will build my church. What does that mean? I don't think it's a very good image. My personal favorite image is, I wish Jesus had said, upon this amoeba, I will build my church. Because if it was an amoeba, I could put something squishy in your hand. And we all know from high school biology that amoeba shifts and shapes and goes in different directions. And you got to kind of race to keep up with it. And it's going to split and it's going to move. See, if Jesus had said upon this amoeba, then we would know that we would have to keep up. And we would know that we would have to change. But in Jesus' day, amoebas hadn't been invented yet. And so he had to go with what he had. And that were rocks upon this rock. Now, the Hebrew people had quite the history with rocks. If you go back through your Old Testament, your Hebrew Bible knowledge, you know that when the children of Israel crossed over the Jordan River, that the priests, when they came out, they took big rocks. They took 12 rocks out for the 12 tribes of Israel. You know that Jacob, when he had the dream of Jacob's ladder, he was sleeping on a rock, and when he woke up, he took the rock and said, surely God is in this rock, and he anointed this rock. And you know that David slew Goliath with rocks. And when you read through the Psalms, you know that throughout the Psalms, repeatedly, God is referred to as my rock, my fortress, and my salvation. And so when Jesus says upon this rock, he is speaking something that the people know something about. And even still, that they became a little bit confused as far as how to interpret what it means to have a church built on a rock. Look at the Apostle Paul. Look at the Apostle Paul. You know, it was Erasmus. It was Erasmus in the 1500s who said, a rolling stone gathers no moss. And it was the Mythbusters in their second season who actually proved that a rolling stone gathers no moss. I see that some of you actually saw that episode. But it was as if the Apostle Paul knew what Jesus was saying. And he moved. He was a rock that moved. He took the rock of the faith, the love of God expressed through Christ. And what did he do? He took it out. He went from Jerusalem, and immediately he went north into the Gentile community. He went north, and he went up through Turkey, and then in through Greece, and through the Roman Empire. And he shared the good news with every single person he met. Compared to Peter. Compared to Peter, who, when Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church, he took a much more traditional view. And he stayed in one place. He set his rock down right there in Jerusalem, he and his followers. And the problem is that his view of the church became a little bit high-centered. They became stuck. And so when Paul came back, it's recorded in the book of Acts, he came back and he confronted Peter and he said, what are you doing sitting there on your rock? And right then and there, they started throwing rocks at one another. Peter said to Paul, he said, what are you doing? You can't do this. You can't take this good news out there. It's supposed to be right here for the Hebrew people. And they had the first church fight. Because they had different visions about what it is that could happen. And unfortunately, it became the pattern that would last for 2,000 years, up to right now. We still, as a church, throw rocks back and forth. You can't do that. Well, you can't do that. Why are you sitting on your rock? Why aren't you out moving? Well, upon this rock, I will build my church. And I want you to think about that. What would the church look like if Jesus said to you, right now, based upon your faith, upon this rock, I will build my church? And he pointed at you and your faith. Again, what would Ember would be one of those, a rolling stone gathers no moss, and any of those who have followed Ember throughout her life know that is true about that young lady. What about you? What would that look like? Maybe it might look like this. That the rock of your faith is kind of blocking the way. Maybe you're on fire. And your faith is on fire, and you would be just exploding with energy. Maybe you would be creating brickianity, a wall, something blocking your way. Maybe it would be a painful experience. Maybe your faith right now is a painful thing for you. Maybe your faith is a peaceful place, and your church would be a peaceful place. After the 8 o'clock service somebody came out and said, no, that was a rock cairn. A marker to show the way for other people. I said, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Maybe your church would be active and moving, skipping along, doing all kinds of different things, dancing across the lake. Maybe your church would be moving and grooving and timeless. Timeless. What would your church look like? Is it glowing? Where is your faith right now? Because it's your faith that determines what the church will look like. There's so many different definitions. And one of the things I think that we forget to do is to go back to what Jesus said, how Jesus defined what this church, what this rock was going to look like. And when I was studying the passage, I was thinking to myself, did the church ever really read the Bible? Does the church read the Bible like these kind of passages? I mean, because Jesus said that the rock would be dynamic and would be active and would be expansive. And that not even the gates of hell could prevail against it. That the church would be so expansive and moving that it would destroy any barriers that stood between God and people. He likened the church to a key that unlocks any doors. He saw the church as something that would be flung wide out into the community, out into the world, even out into the cosmos. It was huge. It wasn't sitting on the rock. It was out on the rock. And unfortunately, oftentimes, the church has missed that. And has done the exact opposite. Instead of opening doors, they close doors. Instead of inviting all people in, they excluded people. And throughout history, and even right now in our own society, the church has lost a sense of Jesus' vision. And instead we see so much of this. And so much of this. And so much of this. Today we had our annual meeting just this past hour. And I started thinking that, do we as Columbine United Church, do we have a vision for what God can do? Are we expansive? Are we energetic? Are we breaking down doors and inviting people in? What I realized is it comes to you and your faith. The biggest mistake, we think that the church is like this building and this piece of property. We say, well, what are you doing? I'm going to church on Sunday morning. Well, you should be saying that every time you get up in the morning. Because the church is about you. If you come here, I always tell people, if you come here into this building expecting to find God, I'm going to tell you, you're going to have a tough time, because the only God you're going to find in here is the God you bring in with you. You need to be looking for God out there and finding God out there in the middle of your life. My only job right here is to get you off your rock and get you moving and living. I want you to think about your soul, about your life, and about your faith. For me, I want you to feel this oneness with God that Jesus felt. Jesus felt no separation between him and God, and he tried repeatedly to tell us the same thing. You're not separate from God. God is with you. Jesus wanted you to feel the love of God and the grace of God and the forgiveness of God. Jesus wanted you to be on fire for your faith. Be on fire for the love of God, and be on fire to share this with people. And so that you're glowing, you're literally glowing with grace and love and mercy. So much so that when you're out there in the world, people look at you and they go, you're different. You're so different. And they begin to wonder why you are different. And so they ask you, why are you so different? And you show them why you're different. And you only use your words if you have to, because it's all really about your actions and how you treat other people. And the crazy thing about our lives, we are the living embodiment of that church. And fortunately and unfortunately, we can either do so much damage or we can bring so much grace and love. See, that's what I learned when I was 9 years old. And I had that rock. And I released it. And at first I thought, this is going to be great. Until I saw my mother. And those hands fly up to her face. And have you ever had one of those moments where you said, come back? Haven't you ever had those moments where you said something and you saw what it was going to do to somebody and you said, oh, please come back? And in that moment, I thought, oh, no. God was watching out for me that day. And there was divine intervention, I like to think. Because the spin that I put on the rock made it so that it hit and glanced off. Not a crack. Not a chip. And I breathed a sigh of relief, as did my mother, for but a second. And then that two-syllable word that would freeze me in my tracks, I didn't necessarily hear it, but I saw it. And the keys to the kingdom were not necessarily opened up, but the keys to my bedroom were. And she put me in there. And after she cooled off of it, she came in and I learned the lesson of grace and love. I didn't get paddled. I wasn't told, wait till your father gets home. Instead, she taught me, don't ever throw rocks. They can do so much damage. And instead, she wrapped me in love.